Hi, everybody. This is Betsy Leonard, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio, where we educate, enlighten, and entertain. Well, folks, I can't believe it is already the month of March. Are you working on improving yourself? Do you want to know about your conscience? Do you want to listen to this podcast? I have with me today a very special guest. His name is Leonard Perlmutter. He is author, along with his wife, of the book, Your Conscience, The Key to Unlock Limitless Wisdom and Creativity and Solve Life's Challenges. And Leonard Perlmutter's co-author is his wife, Jenness. Am I saying that right, Leonard? Jenness.
Sure.
Jenness.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Jenness. Cortez-Perlmutter. And Leonard Perlmutter is also founder and director of the American Meditation Institute, and how do you pronounce that, Leonard? Averill Park, New York.
Averill Park.
Averill Park, New York.
Yeah.
I found out that's upstate New York. I'm in New Jersey, folks, so I thought maybe it was near me. I want to welcome you, Leonard Perlmutter, to Chatting with Betsy today.
Well, I'm honored. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm going to ask you what I ask every author, and that is, what motivated you to write this book? Because the book sounds very interesting, and I have to add, because I'm into book covers, I just love to observe the book covers, and on the book cover, folks, it shows a keyhole with the key in it, which the name of the book is The Key to Unlock, right? So very apropos. I like that. I like your book cover.
Thank you.
So you're welcome. So what motivated you to write this book?
Well, first, I have to say I had no desire to write the book, but like with everybody, I was surprised and a bit uncomfortable when COVID hit in March, for us, March of 2020. And my wife, Jenness, and I could no longer teach classes live here at the American Meditation Institute in Averill Park, and that was a challenge. And I contemplated how I could go forward sharing the teaching when I wasn't able to have students come in. And I contemplated that issue and came up with the idea that, what do I have at my availability that I could share with people that would help them to deal more skillfully with the challenges of COVID and the entire political scene that everybody is surrounded with in this culture today. And what I came up with was, I need to share the teaching. And then I thought to myself, well, what aspect of the teaching? And I realized the most important thing was about making decisions, how to make the best decisions that will bring about the most rewarding consequences. And for me, it's been all about the conscience, because the conscience is the only function of the mind, and we'll talk more about this, I assume, but the conscience is so powerful in its ability to reflect perfect, super conscious wisdom that's outside the matrix of our own everyday life and the laboratory of our mind-body sense complex. So that's what I decided to do. I will share with them my experience with, as Jiminy Cricket would say, letting the conscience be our guide.
Well, that sounds very interesting. And I think when people think of a conscience, their conscience, sometimes we might be reminded of that when we do something wrong, and then we have a guilty conscience. But I don't think, Leonard,
that's one of the major reasons why we don't want to examine the conscience, because what do? We associate it with guilt. And that's not what the conscience is about at all. That's a superimposition from the culture. That's just not correct, and yet it's a faulty concept that we have stored in the unconscious mind. We have a lot of faulty concepts stored in the unconscious mind. Habits that we got from mom or dad or grandma or grandpa or celebrities or politicians. Not that those people were malicious, not that we were dumb at the time, but we were young, we were naive, we wanted to be accepted, and so we incorporated those habits unconsciously in our own unconscious mind. And many of them are faulty. It's a little bit analogous to when we were in grade school and we learned about arithmetic, and the teacher said, well, how much is 1 plus 2? And we learned 1 plus 2 is 3. But if the truth be known, we have had some teachers that have taught us that 1 plus 2 equals 4. Now, that concept was wrong, but they were certain about it. We were young, we were naive, we were impressionable, so we accepted it. Mm-hmm. And it's on our hard drive. And when emotional buttons are pushed, those kinds of faulty concepts seem to be our go-to. The problem for us is that when we use those faulty concepts, we experience pain, and we cause pain for other people.
So true. That's very true. I think people don't think of the conscience. I am now, because I'm starting to go to different courses of, how we think, of what is going on with us. How would you explain the conscience? Because this really interests me.
Okay, it interests me too. That's why I wrote it. So the conscience is one of 4 functions of the mind. What do I mean by that? Well, I think that most of us had the intuitive feeling when we were young that there were different voices in our mind. And that's absolutely correct, as it turns out. There are actually 4 voices. But of the 4 voices in our mind that help us make decisions of what to do and what not to do, only the conscience has the power to make a decision. The other 3 functions of the mind that I'm sure we'll discuss in a little while are the ego, the senses, and the unconscious mind. Now, none of those 3, ego, senses, or unconscious mind, have any power to make a decision. The decision-making rests exclusively with the conscience. And when I learned that first, Betsy, my eyes bulged. I was so struck by the realization that if that's really true, it meant to me that every single decision I had ever made and every single decision that I will ever make has been and always will be made by the conscience. You see, the ego, the senses, and the unconscious mind, they're only what? They're advisors. And they become very strong lobbyists for their limited perspective. No doubt they're often wrong, but they're never in doubt. And they create a tremendous amount of noise in our mind, don't they? The ego,
yes, they do.
The unconscious mind. And when the ego, senses, and unconscious mind are untrained, lack appropriate parenting, that noise renders one of the most important capacities of the conscience and deletes it. It eliminates it. And so what happens is when there's so much noise in the mind, which there is with every human being now, because most people are not training their mind or parenting it, with so much noise in the mind, the conscience only has one choice, and that is to rubber stamp the loudest voice that it can hear. And so that's what brings the pain. That's what brings the pain. But there's another way. If we can learn through experimenting with trying to parent the ego, the senses, and the unconscious mind to state their limited perspective, which sometimes is appropriate, no question about it. I need a healthy ego. You need a healthy ego, Betsy, to have this conversation and make sense of it. And afterwards, if we go do some marketing and we turn on our car or our truck, in order to drive an automobile or a truck, we need a healthy ego to keep us alive. So the ego, the senses, and the unconscious mind are not always wrong, but neither are they always right. Mm-hmm. And if we can convince them through experimenting with simple experiments to state their perspective, what they would like to see happen or what they would like not to see happen, but then to be quiet. And in that stillness and quietness of the mind, the conscience has another capacity. Like a mirror, it can reflect super-conscious wisdom from the super-conscious portion of the mind that resides at the core of our being. Now, the superconscious mind is nothing we learned about in grade school or high school or college or post-grad. But the superconscious portion of the mind is not a figment of our imagination. It's the same portion of the mind where Albert Einstein saw mathematical equations. It's the same portion of the mind where Paul McCartney regularly hears beautiful melodies. Doesn't mean that any of us is necessarily going to become a songwriter or a physicist. What it does mean is, if through experimenting we can convince the ego, senses, and unconscious mind to share their limited perspective and then quiet down, the conscience can reflect superconscious wisdom into our conscious mind that will tell us and advise us the thought to think, the words to speak, and the action to take that will enable us individually and collectively to fulfill the purpose of our lives without pain, misery, or bondage.
Wow, that is really powerful.
It's so powerful, Betsy. And we've never learned anything like this in school. And when I was in school, I'll just speak for myself, no matter what grade level, the only thing we were really asked to do was to memorize. Memorize this, memorize that. Mm-hmm. Nobody has taught us how to parent and train the mind. And it's so, so important because the mind is our most powerful instrument. We cannot speak nor act without first entertaining a thought. Thoughts, therefore, are our most important and powerful strategic reserve. But nobody taught us.
So true. I have to admit, Leonard, I mean, I'm 64, and I am now coming to understand that thoughts have such a powerful impact on our health, on our psyche, on our bodies, that I'm just learning this now. I mean, I've heard it before, but now it's like really sinking in to my brain about it, and I'm working on my conscience. I'm working on my thoughts. Please go ahead. This is so interesting. I have these fascinated.
I think about these things and contemplate them all the time, because a thought is like an embryo, and when you give your attention to it, when you continue to give a thought your attention, that starts the incubation process of that embryo. And at a certain point, a concrete form comes about from that embryonic thought. And what is that first concrete form? A word, speech. And with even more attention, another concrete, more concrete form materializes. And that's action. And thoughts lead to action. And action always leads to consequences. That's what thousands of years ago yoga scientists called the law of karma. And then Newton said, yes, that's true. I call it the third law of motion. For every action, there's an equal reaction. Mm-hmm. So yes. Thoughts lead to action, and actions lead to consequences that can lead us in one direction or another. Fortunately, we all have a pretty good idea the consequence that we want to experience. We want to experience happiness and health and security, loving, nurturing, creative relationships and purpose in life. So then that begs the question, doesn't it, Betsy? How are we going to get to point B from point A? And of course the answer is we need a business plan. We need a philosophy of life that will encourages us to parent our ego, senses, and unconscious mind so they can provide us their limited perspectives and then quiet down so that the conscience can then reflect superconscious wisdom to guide us safely, rewardingly through our thoughts and then our words and our actions that bring about consequences that bring us fulfillment.
That is incredible. That is such nuggets of wisdom. And I have to ask you, Leonard, if you could give an example of, how would someone direct their thought to have a positive action and a positive outcome. Mm-hmm. And then a negative. If you could give an example of both, that I would love that.
Okay. Well, first we have to recognize that every thought is only a suggestion. It's not an imperial command. Every thought is only a suggestion. Mm-hmm. But since every thought has a consequence, I better be darn sure that I'm bringing the conscience into the deliberation and training the ego, senses, and unconscious mind, not only to give their opinions, but then to quiet down to let the conscience reflect superconscious wisdom. So when we begin to experiment with this process, the first thing that we have to remember is not to take on too much too soon. And what does that mean? We have to be kind to ourselves. We have to honor the limitations that we're at. We never learned this when we were children. And we have these deep grooves in our unconscious mind that turn into our autopilot. So we start with seemingly insignificant no-brainers. What do I mean? Hey, we just finished dinner. The question then is, are we going to brush our teeth? Okay, are we going to brush our teeth? Are we not going to brush our teeth? So in such a situation, Betsy, what I do is I call a family meeting of the mind. I call the ego, the senses, the unconscious mind, and the conscience all together with me. I'm the parent. And we all sit around the kitchen table. And I say, okay, we just finished dinner. Are we going to brush our teeth or are we not going to brush our teeth? First, I'm going to call on the ego. Ego, what do you think? And the ego is very glad to say, I'm against it. I vote no. Because I'm against any change, because any kind of change I always associate with some form of death of my control. And that's very uncomfortable. And so I say, well, thank you very much. Thank you for your sharing of your perspective. Now, please sit down, and I'm going to call on the senses. Senses, what do you think? Well, I like the meal, the senses say, but the dessert was excellent. So, insofar as brushing the teeth, I'm against it, but I am in favor of a second slice of apple pie. Okay, well, thank you for your perspective, senses. That's very nice. Thank you. Now, unconscious mind, what do you have to say? And what does the unconscious mind usually say? Oh, well, it's my habit to support the ego and the senses, so I vote no too. I said, okay, well, thank you all for your limited perspective. Now, let's be quiet and sit respectfully, and I'm going to call on the conscience to reflect superconscious wisdom, and let the conscience share that for us. And the conscience might say something like, we all know that life is not really a sprint. It's more like a marathon. And for a marathon, we need what? We need healthy gums. We need healthy teeth. We need a healthy immune system. And if we can just take 2 minutes, take a time out, go into the bathroom together, brush the teeth, that will go a long way in serving us, providing us strong, healthy gums and teeth and an immune system. And so it's up to me then, the parent, to convince the ego, senses, and unconscious mind to all go with me into the bathroom for the sake of an experiment. This is not forever. This is not a New Year's resolution that I'll feel guilty about. This is just a short-term, 2-minute experiment as a beginning, a middle, and an end. And we go in, we brush the teeth, we come back to the kitchen table, and I again ask each of the functions of the mind, what did you experience? And what does the ego say? It wasn't as bad as I thought. And I didn't die. So right now, I'm scratching my head, the ego says, because I always equated any kind of change with some form of death. That's what I've been told by the reptilian brain ever since I can remember. That's why I'm always afraid of a saber-toothed tiger that might be coming around the next corner. But it wasn't so bad. I said, well, thank you. Now please sit down. Senses, how about you? What did you experience? Well, the senses say, I wanted that second piece of apple pie, but it wasn't as bad as I thought, because when the tongue was gliding over the front teeth after we brushed, there was none of that mossy feeling, and I really dislike that mossy feeling. But it was nice and slick and clean. I liked that. I said, okay, thank you. And unconscious, how about you? Well, it wasn't so bad, the unconscious said. It wasn't really so bad. So what has happened, Betsy? I have done a simple experiment in which the ego, senses, and unconscious mind have experienced something pleasant, where they originally thought it would be unpleasant. So what does that mean? It means that they trust me as their parent. I have their best interest at heart. They might not believe me completely if I asked for too much, but it was a simple little experiment. Mm-hmm. And they also have less fear of the conscience, because the conscience was delivering this message from the superconscious portion of the mind, and it turned out to be correct. And they had a pleasant experience. That provides me, as their parent, the opportunity to offer another experiment, another easy experiment, and then another easy experiment, so that they can expand their perspective and their consciousness. And so what we wind up doing is changing the software of the mind. We're upgrading the software. which we do all the time with our computer, but we never do it with our mind, which is interesting since our mind has created the computer.
That's incredible, Leonard. I have heard people say that the ego is your amigo, and also that the ego doesn't like to experience anything uncomfortable, which is why it's uncomfortable for people to get out of their comfort zone, but that's how you grow. What's your feeling on that, your perspective?
Well, I agree. I think that change is tough, even though everything is changing. All things must pass, as George Harrison sang. All things must pass. And yet the ego, because of its reliance on the reptilian brain, fears annihilation, equating all change with some form of pain and dis-ease. But that's not always true. But our culture really is constantly bombarded, isn't it? Our mind is constantly bombarded by all these thoughts of fear through the media and all of this technological social media postings. Fear this, fear that, fear this, fear that. Be angry about this, be angry about that, be angry about losing this, be angry about not getting that. Mm-hmm. And so we remain enslaved to that noise in our mind all the time, which renders the conscience inoperable insofar as reflecting superconscious wisdom. So instead of doing that, it can only rubber stamp the loudest voice, and to make all our decisions based on the ego senses and unconscious mind, which are often wrong, is just not what we need to be doing.
This is so interesting, Leonard.
On the other hand, the conscience will tell us when a slice of apple pie is just what we need to experience without guilt. But when the second piece of apple pie is offered, we're also asked by the conscience to say thank you, but no thank you. And we have to have the mental flexibility enough to say thank you without guilt and enjoy thoroughly that first piece of apple pie and confidently say no thank you. I'll pass on the second piece. Why? Because I'm making this decision not just for me, but I'm making it for my heart and my liver and my pancreas and my muscles and my brain, because I am living a marathon.
You're just amazing, Leonard. I could listen to you all day. You do have profound wisdom. I just love what you're saying.
But I don't want you to believe. Betsy, I don't want you to believe me, and I don't want any of our listeners to believe me. What I am interested in, if they are interested in it, is to experiment for yourself with what we're talking about. Only then will you know the truth, and you'll know that you know it, and you'll own it, and then you don't have to be dependent on all of these talking heads outside of you to know what's to be done and what's not to be done. That will engender self-confidence and self-reliance. That's what we're looking for. So I encourage people to go out and get or make a little hat that says on it, Doubting Thomas, because a good scientist who experiments is a doubting Thomas, just like Thomas Edison. Mm-hmm.
Right.
So be objective about it. Brush your teeth after the meal and ask yourself, how do you feel? physically, mentally, emotionally. My experience has been better. So I was willing to listen to the conscience to do another experiment and another experiment and another experiment. Pretty soon, that becomes my habit. Just like learning how to drive an automobile. When I was 16 years old, I was pretty nervous driving that big automobile. I'd never done anything like that before. Didn't know how to turn the wheel to the left, to the right. I didn't know how to smoothly start the car from a red light, or how to stop for a red light without jerks in the automobile. And when I was asked to parallel park, I almost had an anxiety attack. But now, I just, turn the key on, and there's just driving. And it's a joy, because I have a global skill. That's what we're looking for, a global skill to coordinate the ego, senses, and unconscious mind to the unerring superconscious wisdom reflected by the conscience.
That is very, very interesting. I just can just absorb you like a sponge, because I agree with what you're saying, and I'm just starting to learn, actually, all of this now, but better late than never. And can you give an example
it's just the right time. It's just the right time.
Yeah. Of a negative, like if someone chooses their conscience does a negative thought.
And we have lots of negative thoughts that conflict with the super conscious wisdom. So when a thought comes into my awareness that is a negative emotion, when I'm driving the automobile, going into work, and some maniac going at seemingly, 80, 90 miles an hour in a 55 zone, cuts me off in traffic, and I have to slam on the brake to avoid an accident. And what happens then? Anger comes forward from my unconscious mind and into my conscious mind, and I am intimately aware of anger. Okay, I now have a new relationship with anger, which just a moment ago was snoozing in my unconscious mind, but now it's active in the conscious mind. Once it comes forward in my conscious mind, I have a choice. If I serve it and I keep on giving it my attention, what's going to happen? Oh, hormones are going to poison my entire physiology. So who suffers? Me. But if I can offer that anger back to the origin from which it came. What is the origin from which it came? It is the same origin from which everything came. We call that G-O-D. Everything has come from G-O-D, no matter what you call that, in whatever tradition you are most comfortable. But whatever that supreme intelligence is, it has manifested everything. But with that anger, which is poisoning me, what is the purpose of my receiving it? It's living in my unconscious mind, which is not helpful, really. It's a faulty concept. But once it makes its way into my conscious mind, instead of serving it and poisoning my body and my mind, if I can offer it back to the origin from which it came, what does that do? Sacrifice is the mechanism for transformation. You see that anger? What is that anger? It's energy. And what do we learn about energy in the 5th grade? Energy cannot be created. It cannot be destroyed. But it can be transformed. Oh, yes, I did little experiments with that in grade school. I had ice, and I heated it up, and I transformed it into water. And then I heated up the water, and I got gas. So now, Leonard is telling us, when anger comes into our awareness that conflicts with the superconscious wisdom of the conscience, if I take that anger and offer it back to the origin from which it came, that sacrifice will automatically transform that energy, that debilitating, contractive, poisonous energy, into a positive and expansive energy, a healing energy, an increase in my willpower, and an increase in my creativity that I can use in any relationship.
Wow, that's, I totally agree. I have turned my anger into a positive energy, and I became an advocate.
That's right.
Due to my husband's having Alzheimer's at a young age. And I had to do something with my anger. I couldn't let it destroy me. And I encourage people to, turn their anger into a passion, turn it into doing something good. Well, and that's how I became.
And you don't have to look very far, because another relationship will come.
Right.
This is
just so fascinating, Leonard.
Am I going to serve the conscience, or am I not going to serve the conscience? So I thought all of this was a good enough idea to put it in a book.
Wow, that book is phenomenal. And your book is available on Amazon.
Yeah, everywhere. And all fine booksellers. Yep.
It's very, I believe, remember 5-star reviews, very good reviews. And Leonard, do you teach courses via Zoom?
Yes. Yeah, it's called the Foundation Course to Optimize Your Conscience. In fact, we have another class beginning in March, on the 22nd of March. It's a 6-week course. It's called the Foundation Course. And interestingly, physicians can receive 18 continuing medical education credits for taking that course. The AMA endorses it. So,
wow.
And you can come to our website, AmericanMeditation.org, AmericanMeditation.org, and on the home page right there is a nice little notice about the Foundation course, and that will direct you to let you know all about the curriculum and how to register for classes. One coming up March 22nd.
Wow, thank you. I was going to ask you, there was a website that people can go on, and I would highly recommend checking it out. For the audience to check it out, I'm going to check it out myself. You were just fascinating, Leonard Perlmutter, and I want to thank you for coming on Chatting with Betsy. I could talk to you for hours. I really appreciate you coming on, writing your book, helping others. You've wrote other books. You are just amazing, and you have much wisdom that I think everyone can benefit from listening to you, reading your book, and going on your website and to find out more information about you and your various courses and your books. You have about your books on your website too, don't you?
Yes, the book is on the website as well. You can, and also, Betsy, we have every Sunday we have a free guided meditation, Sunday morning, 9:30 to 11 Eastern Time, and on the Monday following, everybody who was at the guided meditation can receive a free recording that they can use during the week.
Oh, wow. And that's 9:30 a.m. to 11 a.m. on Sunday.
Eastern Time, correct.
Eastern Time. Oh.
And that link is right on the homepage, too, at
Great.
AmericanMeditation.org.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Leonard Perlmutter, for coming on today, chatting with Betsy. I so appreciate it. And I can't thank you enough for sharing your profound wisdom. Folks, we need a book like this. I don't know about you, but I know I do. And I'm really just starting. And it's never too late, folks. I mean, I'm 64, and I'm just starting to really understand in my own life how thoughts have affected me. And, the stress of caregiving has affected me, and I'm doing that. And this helps. Your information helps me, and I just love interviewing different, people with their different philosophies. So I want to thank you again, Leonard, for coming on, and really for helping people. Thank you so much. And the meditation, I'm going to have to check it out on Sunday. I want to thank you. I want to thank the audience for listening. Please share this podcast to help other people. If you missed any of it, you can hear it on your favorite podcast outlet. I'm on Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon.com, just to name a few. It's free to subscribe. And I forgot to say the disclaimer at the beginning. The views of the guests may not represent those of the host of the station. And I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, CEO of Passion World Talk Radio, for making this all possible. And I want to thank Jeannie White, who is the station manager, for producing the show, writing the blog. Please read the blog because it will have information about Leonard Perlmutter and the website. And you're going to want to read the blog to get this information. Free meditation, that is awesome. I want to take advantage of that. And I just want to thank everyone for listening. And in a world where you can be anything, folks, please be kind. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy, and Passionate World Talk Radio. Bye-bye now.